I represent a group called Wisconsin Christians for Justice in Palestine, and we are one of the sponsoring organizations of this event. I'm also a retired pastor here in town, retired from a church in the South Side, and now a member here at Redeemer. This event is sponsored not only by the group that I represent, but also sponsored by the Wisconsin Coalition for Justice in Palestine, Director Janan Najib, and we all work kind of under that umbrella. First Unitarian Society, JVP of the Jewish Voice for Peace in Madison, another group, and several other groups have helped sponsor this. We were able to bring Dr. Sidhwa here because we got information that he will be in the area, and he has been working in Madison the last 2 days, and we were able to put together this event in rather quick order here in Milwaukee. So we're grateful that we're able to do that and to hear his testimony. Feroze is a humanitarian surgeon. He practices in the Bay Area, I think, of California. Isn't that where your area from? He was born in Houston, Texas, and grew up in a town I came from, Flint, Michigan. I was so surprised to hear that. So he's kind of like our kids' age, and they know some of the same schools, so it's great to have another Flintite there, you know, after all these years. Feroze is a volunteer humanitarian surgeon, and he has given weeks of work in areas around the world, primarily I think through the World Health Organization. And he's had 2 stints in Gaza, the last one this spring. He has been working in Ukraine, Zimbabwe, and probably some other places too. And so that lets you know where his heart is. By Conrad Koch. And Conrad is here, and you can speak to him afterwards. It's his understanding of what life is like in Gaza now with the war that's going on and how he interprets it through the lens of an artist. So it adds to our space up here. Feroze said that basically, and we all know that oftentimes you get to more pertinent information if you allow for questions. So we want to do that. Doctor.
I don't think I've stood before a music stand since I was in Flint, probably, actually. So hi, yeah, my name's Feroze. I'm a trauma surgeon in California. I work in Stockton. It's kind of east of the Bay Area. Can you hear me, or no? It's okay?
Just keep it up.
No? Oh, okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I tend to mumble. Yeah, my name's Feroze. I'm a trauma surgeon in California. I work east of the Bay Area in a town called Stockton. And yeah, I've worked in Gaza twice since October 7th. I've also worked in Ukraine, in Haiti, and Zimbabwe, in the West Bank. You know, Gaza is a different place for sure. I've never seen anything like what's going on in Gaza. How much worse it got, I was surprised by between my first and second trips. They were about a year apart. It was Ramadan both years. And but I'll just tell you about 2 patients that I saw my first trip, and maybe I can use them to explain a little bit about what the Gaza Strip is and what we're doing to the Gaza Strip and the people there. And then then we can just talk about anything that you might be interested in regarding this trip, or regarding anything, I guess. So the first one was a little girl, a 9-year-old girl named Juri. So I was at European Hospital, which is on the eastern edge of Khan Yunis, which is kind of in the middle of Gaza. And Juri, with her family, had been told to evacuate their home and go somewhere else. So her mom and dad packed her and her 4 siblings into their car, and they drove south to Rafah. This is last year, when Rafah still existed. And they got there. They went to Juri's grandparents' house, and the parents dropped the kids off, and then they went out looking for all the stuff that old people and children need to survive. And when they got back, the house had been destroyed, and the neighbors told them that some of your kids went to European hospitals, some of them went to Kuwaiti Specialty Hospital. So mom went to Kuwaiti Specialty Hospital, and dad went to European, where I was. But this is 2 weeks before I got there. So when he gets there, he finds that Jury has already had an operation, and she's seemingly doing okay. But over the next 2 weeks, she degrades and degrades and degrades. And nobody is coming to see her. None of the doctors are coming by. Oh, this is my patient. No, they just kind of move on to the next one, and they're not. So the parents are kind of, or the dad is kind of confused about that. And then when I found her, actually not me, when me and Mark Perlmutter found her, he was an orthopedic surgeon in North Carolina that I was there with. When we found her, she just rolled into the preoperative area for no reason that anybody knew. Nobody knew who had booked her case. Nobody knew what she needed done. And it was Ramadan, and Mark and I were the only two non-Muslims probably in the whole hospital. So that we were there because it was iftar. It was the evening meal that Muslims eat during Ramadan was going on then. But Mark and I were doing whatever we wanted. So this girl rolls in her bed, and the nurse said, "Can you do her operation?" And I said, "No, of course not. We have no idea what's wrong with her or who she is or who her parents are. We've never met them. You can't just operate on a child." But when we looked at her, actually, we realized she was going to die pretty soon. Actually, and it wasn't obvious why, but it was pretty clear. Her heart rate was 170 or 180. Her blood pressure was undetectable. Actually, for a small child, if you can't feel the pulse in their hand, that means their blood pressure is extremely low. Actually, for an adult too, I guess, but for a child, it's pretty unusual. And so she really was about to die. And furthermore, her brain wasn't even working properly with the rest of her being so messed up at this point. She would just scream out in pain constantly. She didn't have any idea where she was. The only thing she would say is, Wayne Baba, where's my dad? And but so Mark and I looked at her, and we could tell she had an external fixator. Actually, it was on her left leg. She had an external fixator. That's the rod with pins that go into your bones to hold them steady while they heal. And otherwise, we couldn't really tell what was wrong with her because, again, we couldn't examine her. She would just scream at the top of her lungs. So we gave her a bunch of IV fluids, and we were able to actually get her into the operating room and anesthetize her without killing her. And when we rolled her on her side, a bunch of maggots fell out of her bottom and her leg. She had these huge necrotic wounds on her buttock and especially her buttock and left leg. Her arm was broken too, but that was kind of the least of her worries. When we washed all these things away and got her cleaned up a little bit, we could see that what had been done was she had 2 wounds on both of her bottom cheeks, her butt cheeks. And the one on the left was so deep that it actually exposed the lowest bones in her pelvis. And a large chunk of skin had kind of been torn off and then just tacked back in place by some sutures. Now that's terrible operative technique. Mark and I were horrified, not only by what was happening to the poor little girl, but also just by what doctor did this? This is not a surgeon's work, this is ridiculous. And so we were pretty mad about that actually, but I'll tell you about that later. So we debrided this girl's wounds, meaning just removed all the necrotic and dead tissue, bandaged her up. We both vowed that no matter what the operating room staff said, we would operate on her again the next day. And so we were able to get her healthy over the next about 2 weeks. And now, like I said, I'd never actually met her mom or dad. I didn't know anything of what I just told you about her yet. But so the first thing, who closed these wounds? Who did this terrible, completely useless operation? Well, actually, it turned out that the day she came in, there was an orthopedic surgeon who was supposed to be on call, but he was dead. He'd been killed a few days before, and the call schedule hadn't been adjusted, I guess, so there was nobody there. So it was just an orthopedic resident who was in their second year and a medical student. They had no idea what to do, so they just did the best they could, which is laudable in my opinion. And when I met Jury's dad, I learned the story of how they were in Khan Yunis and then they went to Rafah and they were trying to avoid, the bombing and the shelling. And, this man that I met, he was really an incredible human being. His love of his daughter was just something that was kind of a sight to behold. The normal, if you watch the, CNN or read the New York Times or something, you often hear that the Palestinians just want their children to all be martyrs and they all want them to die for some reason. That's just radically opposite the truth of what you see when you're there. This man, he was a little bit shorter than me, maybe a little bit younger than me. He was just a very, very sweet man. Once Juri's sepsis, the infection that these wounds were causing, once that resolved, her brain started working normally again. And she didn't remember the past 2 weeks, but she all of a sudden realized that her dad would just do anything that she told him to, because he was so happy that she was alive, And so it was really funny, because she just started bossing him around, and so all of a sudden he just started saying, I'm not gonna do any more of this surgery crap that you keep telling me to do unless I get honeymelon and phone calls with my siblings who are in a different hospital. And she just, she's a kid, she can't understand that she lives in a land under blockade, and the cell service has been destroyed. So he would, when she would go under anesthesia, this man would go out and I don't know what he would do, but somehow every single time, he would come back with some small thing that was sweet that she would eat, and of course she would complain about it. That's not what I wanted. I wanted this instead. But it was actually really nice to see, just to see a kid get to be a kid and a dad get to be a dad for a minute. And she actually, Juri has been evacuated to Egypt now, and she's actually doing okay. Her hair's regrown, and she's able to eat now, so she's gaining weight and stuff like that. Her leg will probably have to be amputated at some point, but yeah, so that's the first case. And the second one is a guy who was 29 when I met him. His name was Tomer. He was a surgical nurse, actually, in the orthopedic surgery department at Indonesian Hospital, which is in the north of Gaza. And in probably late November of 2023, so just a month and a half after the Hamas-led attack on southern Israel, he was in the operating room at Indonesian, finishing up an operation. He was probably closing the wound at the end of the case. And Israeli soldiers came into the OR and said that he had to go with them. And he said he gave the same answer everybody would, which is I have to just let me finish closing this wound and then I'll go with you. I can't just leave this guy under anesthesia with an open wound. So the Israelis shot him in his knee and left him on the operating room floor. His own team came in, picked him up, and put another external fixator across his legs. In this case, it was his right leg, and admitted him to the hospital. Now, if you look at his Facebook page, which is public, you can see that there's a picture of him in the hospital with the X-Fix on his leg, and you can see he's rattled. Like, he's obviously not happy. He was just victimized, right? But but that's the kind of thing somebody can get over. The physical injury will heal. The mental anguish and the psychiatric injury and things like that from kind of this momentary loss of human dignity and safety and security will fade, especially with some help. But what happened next is really quite different. After he had been shot and was admitted to the hospital, the Israelis raided the hospital again, probably the next day or the day after. They took him from his bed and took him to one of the network of torture chambers that the Israelis have built for people who come out of Gaza. If anybody wants to read about it, there's a really good report from B'Tselem called Welcome to Hell, and it's appropriately named. He was strapped to a table for 45 days. He was fed a juice box every day or every other day sometimes. He was medically neglected to such a degree that the pin sites actually became infected in this external fixator, which is extremely uncommon. And he was beaten so badly that his right eye had to be removed when he was let out of the prison. After about 45 days, because he obviously wasn't a threat to anybody, he was let go, just dumped naked on the side of a road, which is how most Palestinian prisoners are actually released. And he crawled on his bottom for about 2 kilometers until somebody found him and picked him up and brought him to European Hospital, because that's the hospital that's closest to the Kerem Shalom checkpoint where people are usually released. And so that was all about 2 weeks before I met him. When I met him, he was still in septic shock. His external fixator had been removed, his right eye had been removed, and most of his injuries externally had healed, but he was still in septic shock. And Mark and I figured that Mark is like in that same orthopedic surgeon. We figured that it was actually the pin sites on his leg that they needed to be debrided. So we decided to do that, and we went to the operating room staff and we said, hey, we need to debride this guy's pin sites. And they said, no, you can't do that. There's no time. And they were right, actually. There was no time. I had the first 3 days I spent at the hospital. I went around I organized a wound care team because I was told that people were dying of sepsis from untreated wounds on the floor, like Juri would have, right? And so I organized a nursing-led wound care team. And we went around for about 3 days. It took us to characterize everybody in the hospital. There were 250 people admitted to this hospital who needed daily operative wound care. In other words, they needed to be taken from their room, taken to the operating room, put under anesthesia. I need to do something with a knife, and then they need to go back and probably do that again 2 or 3 days later. There's only 4 operating rooms at European Hospital. It's impossible to do, you know? So actually I started taking ketamine from the anesthetic carts and giving it to people on the floor. It's an anesthetic that lets you breathe while you don't feel pain. So you don't have to intubate people to do it, but obviously it's not really a great way to do this kind of thing. It's number one, not the safest way to do it, that's for sure. And number two, the ward is, this is a 250 bed hospital with 1,500 people admitted to it, another 1,500 people sheltering just in the corridors of the hospital, and 10,000 people admitted who are sheltering on the grounds of the hospital. So you can imagine the sewage system backs up literally every day, like literally every day. The radiology department on the first floor would flood with sewage, and people were sleeping on the ground there when this would happen. It was awful. So you can imagine cleanliness was, forget sterility, even basic cleanliness was completely impossible. Nevertheless, we were able to debride these pin sites aggressively using ketamine on the floor, and we also gave them the antibiotics that we had brought with us. Now at the time, you could take things into the Gaza Strip because at that time the Rafah crossing was still open. That's the southern border of Gaza that borders with Egypt. And so you flew to Cairo, you went across the Sinai Peninsula, and then you went in through Rafah, and the Egyptians didn't really care what you took in as long as you weren't taking weapons, right? If you take medicine, if you take gauze, like I took 500 pounds of gauze and 600 pounds of other stuff, which I had to fly on British Airways, which is obviously completely ridiculous, but that was the only way to do it. But nevertheless, even that now has been cut off, because now you have to fly to Amman, because the Philadelphia corridor has been closed, the Rafah crossing has been closed. You have to fly to Amman, which is in Jordan on the other side of Israel. And because you have to come through Israeli territory on an Israeli bus, which they incidentally charge you about $150 for, because you have to do that, they said that you have to adhere to tourism restrictions in Israel, even though you're obviously not going to Israel, you're an international volunteer going to the Gaza Strip. And so they say, well, obviously you can't show up at Ben Gurion Airport with a bunch of surgical supplies and gauze and antibiotics. What is this for? So you can't even take that anymore. But anyway, thankfully at that time we were able to take those things in. So we gave them to him, and physically he got better. We were able to resolve his sepsis until the time we left. And on the day that we left, actually, what was it, April 8th, I guess, in the morning. On the day we left, we have a picture of him in a wheelchair outside the hospital for the first time. It was the first time he'd been able to get out. Physically he looks better. He's 29, and I wish I could show you the picture. He looks like he's 80. When Mark first told me about him, he said, I have a 29-year-old guy that we need to do something for. He explained it to me. So then we went and did what we needed to do to Tamer. And then I said, where's the 29-year-old guy you were telling me about a minute ago? He said, no, this is how we were telling you. This guy's 80 years old. There's no way this man is 29 years old. It was absolutely shocking the way he looked. He's gaunt, he's lost all of his weight, his temporal muscles are sunken in, most of his hair is gray or gone. It's just absolutely shocking. But so Tamer did recover somewhat physically, but mentally and spiritually, he's a completely broken human being. He screams and cries in the middle of the night for no reason. He can't sleep. He wakes up screaming. He begs for pain medications all the time, even though he's not in pain. He has no idea if his wife and children are alive or dead. It's an absolutely shocking destruction of a man's psyche, of his soul, and for what reason? They let him go after 45 days. They obviously weren't afraid of him. Who did that help? And now it's actually kind of amazing. He's in Egypt, like Jury. He's been medically evacuated to Egypt, but he actually won't let any of the Egyptian nurses or doctors help him because he's just so paranoid that he thinks they're all Israeli agents trying to kill him. So that's the kind of thing that we're doing to the Gaza Strip, and I stress we are doing to the Gaza Strip. The Israelis can't do anything, literally nothing, without the bombs, the logistics, the weapons, the jet fuel, the maintenance support, everything that we send to make sure that Israeli pilots can continue to pilot American planes dropping American bombs with American intelligence and American jet fuel. It's not. This is not an Israeli attack on Gaza. It's a U.S.-Israeli attack on Gaza, and we don't have to participate in these things. And the other positive thing about that is if we stop participating, it'll stop immediately. So that's kind of all I have to say about it. If anybody has anything that they're wondering about, or
You had mentioned before about the targeting of the healthcare workers. And I mean, you know, a week here, a week there, other places. How do you feel about were you a target?
Me personally, no. The Israelis probably tried to avoid killing me just because it would be a media headache. You know, you kill a Palestinian doctor, nobody cares, right? But if you kill an American doctor, it's at least going to be something. And the Israelis are the Israelis know what I just told you about how their military is 100% dependent on the United States. They're well aware of that. So they're very, very attuned to the American media and what they would have to explain and not explain. And you just never know what'll take off. You know, like all the, you know, sometimes, you know, maybe I know that if they killed me in Gaza, that the U.S. government wouldn't do anything. Like the Biden administration wouldn't have done anything. The Trump administration certainly wouldn't do anything. But nevertheless, the media, like, yeah, I've written an article for the New York Times. I've written for Politico. Like, they would at least have to acknowledge that I was killed there, and that I probably am not in Hamas. You know, so it's hard to explain. But the targeting of healthcare workers in the Gaza Strip is something that's actually not well understood. How, I mean, everybody knows it's bad, I suppose, if they've heard of it. But just to give you an example or a sense of scale, before October 2023, before the Hamas attack, right, on southern Israel, before this attack on Gaza started, Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, was the worst conflict in the world for healthcare providers, and by a good margin, actually. It was pretty violent. But if you compare the rate of killing of healthcare workers in Gaza and Ukraine on a per capita basis, because Ukraine has 40 million people and Gaza has 2, the rate of killing is 110 times higher in Gaza than it is in Ukraine. Actually, every day for the past at least 3 weeks, I've learned about somebody else that I know that's dead now in Gaza. And actually, while we were sitting over there, I actually got a text message from my friend Nizar. I'll just read it to you. He's an anesthesiologist in Gaza. I don't know if you can actually, I don't know how many people can actually see his picture. He was fat when I left Gaza, and he's incredibly gaunt now. This is just, his home was destroyed. He had to move to the Milwaukee area with his 5 boys and his wife. And it says, this is how Palestinians always write, it's cute. Hello, my dear friend. I've had it for 2 weeks. Hello, my dear friend. I was against going to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation for food because it's risky and a lot of people died or get massively injured. But this starvation hurts a lot. 3 days I went with no food, under the hot sun, with fear, meaning hanging out by the GHF site trying to get some food, running against death, trying to get some food. And I came back frustrated each time with nothing. Except yesterday, I came back with some rice and lentils, but there's still a lot of pain. We made our food as a mixture of injuries, pain, and death, and we ask why the world doesn't care. And that's, yeah, he's an anesthesiologist. I work at the only trauma center for 1 million people in the poorest and most violent county in California. And my hospital won't make a statement about gun violence being bad. You know, it's just completely ridiculous. So that's just, it's just not how hospitals work. Like, that's not what they're doing. They're not institutions of anything. That's not how they work. But at the same time, asserting your political power within the governing structure of the hospital to say, look, you can buy these medicines somewhere else, just buy them somewhere else. That's all we're asking for. That's pretty simple. You know, it might not be easy to get done. It might require coalition building within the hospital and that kind of thing. But it's really important. You know, and if it actually has an effect, that will have political consequences in and of itself. You know, it's not always being on the picket line, that kind of thing. You know, so I actually think it's a wonderful initiative, and I hope people. This is the kind of thing where you actually have to kind of strategize and scheme with your cohort, I suppose you could say, within the hospital that wants to get this done. You know, because it's all going to probably boil down to like the lead pharmacist, and or the CEO and the lead pharmacist, whoever it is. But that's that's really, really great work. You know, I really think it is. And yeah, but beyond that, and we were talking about this earlier. Right now, so, you know, another thing that, again, I think the healthcare worker organizing at the beginning of the attack, that at least that I saw on a national scale, was just, it was a little bit haphazard and not maybe all that well thought out, which is okay. That everybody has missteps. Instead of trying to get your hospital to condemn genocide, which again is probably not going to happen, getting your professional society, and this applies to people broadly, not just healthcare workers, but getting your healthcare society or whatever other professional society you might be a part of, whatever academic society, to not condemn genocide in Gaza. Because again, you also have to remember, genocide is a legal determination. If you're not a legal body, it might be like, why am I saying this? But at the same time, like for me, the targeting of healthcare workers is like that we just talked about, is a very, very prominent feature of this attack on the Gaza Strip. You can describe it in cold academic terms. It's a perfectly real phenomenon. There's not hard to show. And every one of these healthcare societies, I mean, like for me, it's the American College of Surgeons or the American Medical Association. They all have parts of their mission statement that say one of their goals is to be in either solidarity or professional cohesion or whatever term you want to use with our colleagues abroad.
Hi, my name is Janan. I'm part Lebanese, and I'm used to growing up in a world where everyone is completely ignorant of the complexities of the Middle East and just any and all the history you're talking about. And a couple days after October 7th, my husband and I were going to have dinner with friends, and it just ended up this impromptu, like, Janan, can you tell us a little bit about this? Because we don't understand these things, right? Do you have any ideas? Because I'm thinking in the future, right? These things, like you said, these things that happen again, they're going to happen again. Like, how do we begin the process of kind of like removing that veil in our culture from an educational perspective? Because, I mean, honestly, ignorance is the biggest benefit to this system right now. Like, how do we begin that going forward so that my children don't have to fight against a Gaza?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's hard to come up with like grand strategies about these things, right? Like, I think we all just have to do what we can in our individual lives and in our ability, our particular circumstances, I guess. But what you said about ignorance, like ignorance is a prerequisite to domination. That's an absolutely, I don't know if I'm quoting somebody or if I just came up with that, but that's absolutely true, and that's always been true, you know. And it's doubly and triply and quadruply true in a democratic society, you know. If you didn't have to be convinced, not the people in this room, but if people didn't have to be convinced that the things walking around on two legs in Gaza are actually human beings, then none of this would be an issue, you know. One of the kind of interesting things that happened recently is, do people know who Miss Rachel is? The children's educator and entertainer. She ended up meeting a little girl named Rafat, I think was her name. And this Miss Rachel lady just seems to really genuinely love children of all stripes. And you know, this girl Rafat has a below knee amputation on one side and an above knee amputation on the other. And you know, she's just waddling around and playing like nothing's wrong, you know. But this really moved her, so she just started looking into this, and she's just genuinely horrified, because the attack on Gaza largely is a war on children. It's hard to describe it any other way. And at the same time, the kind of right around that awakening with her was going on was when there was a famous video that came out of probably a 4 or 5 year old girl walking around. You can only see her silhouette, and she's walking through a school that's just in flames. And the rescuers are trying to reach her. Eventually they did reach her, thankfully. But it's just a shocking thing. And this is it. People could see it because it's not a child that's been ripped in two. You know, it's not brains leaking out. It's not blood spurting everywhere. There's no gore. But any parent, and I'm not a parent, but any parent who looks at that, looks at the silhouette of a 5-year-old girl walking alone in a school that's just a raging inferno. I mean, it catches your breath, you know. I mean, it's really shocking. And so when Miss Rachel started talking about it, a bunch of suburban moms who just use Miss Rachel all the time to put their kids to sleep or entertain them or something, they started actually having these breakdowns where they would put their kid to sleep, and then they would Google, oh wait, Miss Rachel was talking about that Gaza thing. Oh my God. And then they would just be horrified. And they would do this like Instagram Live or Facebook Live, because I guess that's what you do when you're sad now. And they would just literally, and it's not actually a bad thing. They would just be bawling, crying, and just, I mean, screaming into the phone like, what? I just put my 4-year-old daughter to sleep, and this 4-year-old girl is burning in a school on the other side of the world, and we're the ones giving them the weapons. What? You know, often a lot of epithets come after that, and you know, that kind of thing happens at some point, I guess you would say, you know? At some point, people realize that, you know, children are just children,